Picture this, you're driving down a lonely highway. The road stretches endlessly, no cars in sight, just the hum of your engine cutting through the silence. For a moment, it feels like freedom until you realize you're not as alone as you think. Out here, beyond the glow of the city lights, highways keep their own dark secrets. Stories of travelers who never reach their destination. Encounters so terrifying, they turn a simple road trip into a nightmare. Tonight, we're going to take that road together if you dare. In this video, we're diving into 10 real road trip horror stories. These aren't campfire tales or made-up legends. These are true events, lived and remembered by those who barely made it through. If you think the open road is safe after dark, think again. By the end of these stories, you may never look at a late-night drive the same way. And with that, let's begin. Our first story takes us deep into the desert highways of Nevada, where one driver learned that not every shortcut is meant to be taken. Story 1: The Desert Shortcut. It was supposed to be a quick detour, a faster way to reach California by avoiding the main interstate. The driver, a man returning from a work trip in Arizona, had been on the road for hours when GPS suggested a quieter desert route. The sun was already sinking, painting the sky orange and violet. It seemed harmless at first. Miles stretched on. The highway narrowed, then broke into cracked asphalt with faded lines. Soon, it was just sand, scrub, and the endless hum of his car. Cell service disappeared. The road felt abandoned, as though no one had used it in years. At first, he shrugged it off. Then came the unease. His fuel gauge dropped faster than expected. He hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour. Worse, there were no houses, no motels, no signs of life at all, just desert swallowing the horizon. As darkness fell, his headlights cut through the emptiness. Then he noticed something in the distance. A faint glow like the lights of a town. Relieved, he pressed on. But when he reached the source, the relief turned to confusion. It wasn't a town. It was a small cluster of old buildings, weathered and falling apart. A gas station with shattered windows. A diner with a faded sign swinging in the wind. An entire roadside stop, frozen in time, abandoned decades ago. Still, he pulled over. His tank was nearly empty, and he hoped to at least find a payphone. Stepping out, silence pressed down on him. Not even crickets sang. He pushed open the diner door. Dust floated in the stale air. Menus still sat on tables. Cups, half filled with what had long since turned to dust, lined the counter. It was as if everyone had left in the middle of a meal and never returned. Then came the sound. A faint shuffle from the kitchen. He froze. At first he thought it might be an animal, but then the footsteps grew deliberate, slow, human. Heart pounding, he backed toward the door. The footsteps quickened, moving closer until he swore someone was only feet away, yet no one emerged. Panicked, he ran to his car, fumbling the keys. As the engine roared to life, he caught one last glimpse of the diner window. A figure stood there just behind the glass, watching. He didn't look back again. Hours later, he finally stumbled onto the interstate with only fumes left in his tank. Later research revealed the place he found didn't exist on any maps. Locals claimed a roadside stop had once stood there, but had burned down years earlier, killing several people trapped inside. If this story unsettled you, hold tight, because our next one doesn't just involve a ghost town, but a traveler who picked up the wrong hitchhiker on a lonely stretch of road. There's a rule many drivers swear by: never pick up hitchhikers. It's a rule born from decades of horror stories and true crime cases, yet some people still choose kindness over caution. One traveler, driving home through the winding backroads of New Mexico, learned that sometimes kindness comes at a chilling cost. It was after midnight and the road stretched endlessly, bordered by desert on both sides. That's when the driver saw him, a lone figure standing near the shoulder, illuminated by the car's headlights. He looked ordinary: jeans, a jacket, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. His thumb stuck out, the universal sign of someone needing a ride. The driver hesitated but eventually slowed down. The man climbed in silently, setting his backpack at his feet. He didn't speak. Not a word of thanks, not even a nod. He simply stared straight ahead. At first, the driver brushed it off. Maybe the stranger was shy or exhausted. But as the miles passed, the silence became oppressive. Every attempt at small talk went unanswered. The hitchhiker never even turned his head. It grew stranger still when the driver realized something. The man wasn't reflected in the side mirror. His own face was clear in the glass, as was the empty road behind him, but no second figure appeared beside him. Heart thudding, the driver gripped the wheel tighter. Then, without warning, the hitchhiker moved. He raised his hand slowly, pointing ahead at the darkness of the road, as if signaling where to go. Confused, the driver kept following the highway. 10 more minutes passed, and the man lifted his arm again, pointing to a narrow dirt road branching off into the desert. The driver hesitated. His instincts screamed at him not to leave the highway. But when he glanced at the man again, the passenger seat was empty. He slammed the brakes. The car screeched to a stop in the middle of the road. His chest heaved as he looked around. No one was there. No door had opened. No sound of footsteps retreating into the desert. Later, he shared his story at a roadside bar, where an old man told him the legend. Travelers often see a silent hitchhiker along that very stretch of road. Some say he points them away from danger, warning them of accidents or ambushes ahead. Others believe he lures them to their deaths, leading them off the highway into the desert where they're never seen again. The driver never discovered which one was true, but to this day, he refuses to pick up anyone on the road, no matter how harmless they may seem. If this tale of a silent passenger disturbed you, then the next one will claw even deeper into your fears. Because this time, it isn't about who you let in your car, it's about who follows you, mile after mile, until there's nowhere left to run. Night driving is always a little tense. The world outside the glow of headlights feels infinite, and every shadow seems alive. For one young couple driving across rural Texas, that unease transformed into sheer terror when they realized another car was tailing them. They had been on the highway for hours, surrounded by nothing but flat fields and stretches of trees. Around 1 a.m., headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. At first, they didn't think much of it, but as the minutes ticked by, the vehicle stayed close, too close. The driver changed lanes, so did the car. The driver sped up. The car matched the speed. He slowed to almost a crawl. The headlights behind him dimmed and then brightened again as if mocking him. A sinking dread filled the car. Whoever was behind them wasn't just driving the same road, they were playing a game. For nearly an hour, the chase continued. Every attempt to lose the car failed. The couple tried pulling into a rest stop, only to see the car idle at the entrance, its headlights glaring, waiting for them to return to the highway. Panic rising, they finally decided to call the police, but there was no signal. The long, empty road swallowed every bar of service. Then something even stranger happened. The pursuing car suddenly turned off its headlights. The darkness was complete. For several terrifying minutes, they could see nothing behind them. Then, out of nowhere, the headlights reappeared, this time closer than ever, almost blinding through the rear window. The driver floored the gas, pushing the car to its limit. Finally, after what felt like hours, lights appeared in the distance, a gas station still open in the dead of night. The couple swerved into the lot, pulling up close to the pumps where people stood around. The pursuing car slowed at the entrance. Its headlights lingered on them for a long, heavy moment. Then, it turned back onto the highway and vanished into the night. Later, when the couple reported the incident, authorities told them it wasn't the first time. Travelers had reported cars that stalked them on that same highway, always at night, always retreating once the victim reached safety. No one had ever managed to record a license plate, and no description matched from one case to another. Some believe it's thrill seekers, targeting random travelers for sport. Others whisper that it's something not entirely human, a presence that feeds off fear in the dead of night. To this day, the couple refuses to drive long stretches of highway after dark. Because once you've been hunted on the road, you never shake the feeling that the next pair of headlights in your mirror could belong to something that isn't just another driver. If you thought being chased was terrifying, wait until you hear what happens when you finally find a place to stop. Our next story takes us into the walls of a roadside motel that held a guest's darkest nightmare. There's a rule many drivers swear by: never pick up hitchhikers. It's a rule born from decades of horror stories and true crime cases, yet some people still choose kindness over caution. One traveler, driving home through the winding backroads of New Mexico, learned that sometimes kindness comes at a chilling cost. It was after midnight and the road stretched endlessly, bordered by desert on both sides. That's when the driver saw him, a lone figure standing near the shoulder, illuminated by the car's headlights. He looked ordinary: jeans, a jacket, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. His thumb stuck out, the universal sign of someone needing a ride. The driver hesitated but eventually slowed down. The man climbed in silently, setting his backpack at his feet. He didn't speak. Not a word of thanks, not even a nod. He simply stared straight ahead. At first, the driver brushed it off. Maybe the stranger was shy or exhausted. But as the miles passed, the silence became oppressive. Every attempt at small talk went unanswered. The hitchhiker never even turned his head. It grew stranger still when the driver realized something. The man wasn't reflected in the side mirror. His own face was clear in the glass, as was the empty road behind him, but no second figure appeared beside him. Heart thudding, the driver gripped the wheel tighter. Then, without warning, the hitchhiker moved. He raised his hand slowly, pointing ahead at the darkness of the road, as if signaling where to go. Confused, the driver kept following the highway. 10 more minutes passed, and the man lifted his arm again, pointing to a narrow dirt road branching off into the desert. The driver hesitated. His instincts screamed at him not to leave the highway. But when he glanced at the man again, the passenger seat was empty. He slammed the brakes. The car screeched to a stop in the middle of the road. His chest heaved as he looked around. No one was there. No door had opened. No sound of footsteps retreating into the desert. Later, he shared his story at a roadside bar, where an old man told him the legend. Travelers often see a silent hitchhiker along that very stretch of road. Some say he points them away from danger, warning them of accidents or ambushes ahead. Others believe he lures them to their deaths, leading them off the highway into the desert where they're never seen again. The driver never discovered which one was true, but to this day, he refuses to pick up anyone on the road, no matter how harmless they may seem. If this tale of a silent passenger disturbed you, then the next one will claw even deeper into your fears. Because this time, it isn't about who you let in your car, it's about who follows you, mile after mile, until there's nowhere left to run. Night driving is always a little tense. The world outside the glow of headlights feels infinite, and every shadow seems alive. For one young couple driving across rural Texas, that unease transformed into sheer terror when they realized another car was tailing them. They had been on the highway for hours, surrounded by nothing but flat fields and stretches of trees. Around 1 a.m., headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. At first, they didn't think much of it, but as the minutes ticked by, the vehicle stayed close. Too close. The driver changed lanes, so did the car. The driver sped up. The car matched the speed. He slowed to almost a crawl. The headlights behind him dimmed and then brightened again as if mocking him. A sinking dread filled the car. Whoever was behind them wasn't just driving the same road, they were playing a game. For nearly an hour, the chase continued. Every attempt to lose the car failed. The couple tried pulling into a rest stop, only to see the car idle at the entrance, its headlights glaring, waiting for them to return to the highway. Panic rising, they finally decided to call the police, but there was no signal. The long, empty road swallowed every bar of service. Then something even stranger happened. The pursuing car suddenly turned off its headlights. The darkness was complete. For several terrifying minutes, they could see nothing behind them. Then, out of nowhere, the headlights reappeared, this time closer than ever, almost blinding through the rear window. The driver floored the gas, pushing the car to its limit. Finally, after what felt like hours, lights appeared in the distance, a gas station still open in the dead of night. The couple swerved into the lot, pulling up close to the pumps where people stood around. The pursuing car slowed at the entrance. Its headlights lingered on them for a long, heavy moment. Then, it turned back onto the highway and vanished into the night. Later, when the couple reported the incident, authorities told them it wasn't the first time. Travelers had reported cars that stalked them on that same highway, always at night, always retreating once the victim reached safety. No one had ever managed to record a license plate, and no description matched from one case to another. Some believe it's thrill seekers, targeting random travelers for sport. Others whisper that it's something not entirely human, a presence that feeds off fear in the dead of night. To this day, the couple refuses to drive long stretches of highway after dark. Because once you've been hunted on the road, you never shake the feeling that the next pair of headlights in your mirror could belong to something that isn't just another driver. If you thought being chased was terrifying, wait until you hear what happens when you finally find a place to stop. Our next story takes us into the walls of a roadside motel that held a guest's darkest nightmare. After hours of relentless driving through Oklahoma's backroads, one weary traveler pulled into a small roadside motel. It wasn't part of any big chain, just a worn sign buzzing faintly with neon, promising vacancy. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the night felt heavier than usual, as though silence itself was watching. The receptionist, an older man with tired eyes, handed over a key and muttered, "Room 6. The traveler barely noticed his strange hesitation. All he wanted was a bed. Room 6 was as ordinary as motels get. A single bed, faded curtains, a flickering lamp. He tossed his bag on the chair and collapsed onto the mattress. Sleep came quickly. But sometime after midnight, he woke with a start. The air felt wrong, thick, suffocating. Then he realized something chilling. The chair where he'd dropped his bag was no longer empty. A shadowy figure sat there, unmoving, watching him. Heart hammering, he reached for the lamp. The bulb flickered to life, illuminating nothing but the chair and his bag. No figure, no shadow. He told himself it was exhaustion, turned off the light and forced his eyes shut. Moments later, he heard it, the sound of someone breathing in the room. Slow, deliberate breaths, not his own. Every hair on his body stood on end. He kept his eyes closed, too terrified to look. The breathing grew louder, closer, until he swore it was right beside his bed. Then, just as suddenly, silence. When morning light seeped through the curtains, the room looked normal again. But when he checked out, curiosity got the better of him. He asked the receptionist if anything strange had ever happened in room 6. The old man's face paled. "You were in that room," he whispered. "We don't rent it out anymore. Not since the night a guest was murdered there, suffocated in his sleep. You must have been given the wrong key." Shaken, the traveler glanced back at the lot. Every door had a number, except room 6. Its door was nailed shut, the number plate missing, as if the room had been erased. If the idea of a haunted room unsettled you, the next story goes even further. Because sometimes, it's not the buildings that are haunted, it's the very road you're driving on. A group of college friends decided to drive through the back highways of West Virginia, seeking shortcuts to save time. The road they found wasn't on their map, but it seemed to connect to the main interstate. So they took it. The asphalt was cracked, the trees thick on either side. After 30 minutes, they realized something was wrong. The road never changed. No signs, no turnoffs, no mile markers, just the same endless stretch of pavement winding between the same trees. At first, they joked about it. Then unease set in. They drove for another hour and still nothing. No gas stations, no houses, not even another car. It was as if they'd slipped into a loop. Worse still, their phones showed no service, no GPS signal. They marked their location, hopping to track progress. After 10 minutes, they checked again. Their dot hadn't moved. It still showed them in the exact same spot. Panic rose. They sped up, desperate to reach something familiar. 2 hours passed. 3. The road never ended. Then one of them noticed something chilling, a dead deer lying by the roadside. They all saw it clearly. But 20 minutes later, they saw the same deer again. Same position, same broken antlers, the same exact scene. It wasn't just endless, it was repeating. By the 4th time they passed the deer, one friend shouted for them to stop. Maybe the road only trapped them as long as they drove. They pulled to the shoulder, turned off the engine, and sat in terrified silence. Minutes stretched like hours. Then a faint sound broke through, footsteps on gravel. Something was walking toward their car. They couldn't see it, couldn't place it, but the crunch of gravel grew closer and closer. Suddenly, their headlights, though switched off, flared to life. The road ahead was empty, but in the rearview mirror they saw it. Dozens of figures standing in the trees, pale and still, staring at the car. The driver screamed, slammed the car into gear, and floored the accelerator. For the first time, the road changed. A sign appeared. Civilization returned. And just like that, they were free. They never spoke of it again, but every one of them swore. If you find yourself on a road that feels too quiet, too empty, never keep driving. Because sometimes the road doesn't want to let you go. If this looping nightmare chilled you, the next story will push the fear even deeper. Because this time, it isn't the road or the buildings. It's the people you meet when you least expect it. Highways are frightening enough when they seem endless. But sometimes, it isn't the road itself that traps you. It's the people you encounter along the way. After their strange escape from the looping highway, another tale surfaced from the same state, whispered among truckers who drive late-night routes through the Appalachians. They call it the woman on the bridge, and the people who have seen her never forget her face. It was around 2 a.m. when a long-haul trucker named Daniel reached a narrow steel bridge that cut across a river deep in the mountains. The moon hung low, fog curling off the water, and his headlights carved pale tunnels through the mist. He crossed that bridge dozens of times before, but this night felt different, too quiet, almost staged. Halfway across, his beams caught movement, a figure standing dead center on the bridge, a woman. She wore a pale dress that fluttered in the wind, her long hair falling like a dark curtain across her face. Her posture was strange, rigid, as if she had been waiting for him. Daniel slowed, uneasy. At first, he thought it might be someone stranded, but as his truck rolled closer, his instincts screamed at him to stop. Something wasn't right. Her dress looked too outdated, like it belonged to another era. And even in the headlights, her face remained shrouded, shadowed in a way that defied logic. He honked the horn, hoping she would move aside. She didn't flinch, didn't even twitch. The air inside the cab grew heavy, almost suffocating. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, debating whether to swerve around her. But then she lifted her head. For the first time, her face was visible. Her skin was ashen, her eyes wide and glassy, her mouth slightly open as if caught in an eternal gasp. She looked more statue than human, her gaze piercing straight through him. Daniel's chest constricted. Every instinct begged him to drive forward to escape, but when he pressed the gas, the truck sputtered, stalled. Panic clawed at him. He turned the key again and again, but the engine refused to respond. The headlights flickered, dimmed, then died. The bridge was plunged into darkness. And in that silence, the woman began to move. Her footsteps echoed on the steel, slow and deliberate, heels clicking against metal. She approached the cab one step at a time, her pale figure emerging from the mist. Daniel could hear the blood pounding in his ears, every instinct telling him to flee, but he was trapped inside a dead machine. When she reached the driver's side window, she stopped. Slowly, she lifted her hand and pressed it to the glass. Cold seeped instantly through the window, frosting the inside. Daniel couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He could only stare as her lips parted. No sound came out, just a silent scream. And then she vanished. The truck roared back to life on its own, headlights flaring bright. Shaking, Daniel slammed the accelerator, tearing across the bridge as fast as the rig could handle. When he finally reached the other side, he didn't stop until morning light burned away the fog. Later, when he shared the story at a diner, another trucker leaned in with a grim face. He said she was real, a spirit trapped on that bridge since the 1960s. A woman who had been driving home on her wedding night when her car plunged through the guardrail and into the river below. Her body was never recovered. Locals say she appears to drivers who are destined to crash there, her presence both a warning and a curse. Some claim that if you stop, she'll try to drag you into the river. Others believe she's searching for someone who will finally notice her, finally acknowledge the death she can't escape. Daniel never took that route again. And to this day, truckers still swap stories of the woman in white who waits on the bridge, her face hidden until it's too late to turn back. If haunted highways disturb you, the next story is far worse. Because it's not just about one person appearing where they shouldn't. It's about a whole town that isn't supposed to exist. And when you find yourself driving into a place like that, you may never find your way back out. Some drivers fear single figures on lonely roads. Others whisper of haunted bridges. But the darkest stories are the ones where the road itself doesn't just take you somewhere strange. It takes you somewhere that isn't supposed to exist at all. This next tale comes from a pair of friends who swear they stumbled into a town that, by every map, every record, every account, shouldn't be there. It was the summer of 1998. Josh and Eric, college roommates, had taken a cross-country trip before classes resumed. Their plan was simple: avoid interstates, explore backroads, and see parts of America most people never bothered to. One evening in rural Kentucky, they realized they were low on gas. The sun had already dipped below the hills, painting the sky in deep bruised colors. Josh checked the map, but the next station was nearly 30 miles away. As the car crawled along on fumes, a glow appeared on the horizon. Streetlights, buildings, relief washed over them. A town, small but alive, rested at the end of the winding road. They drove in cautiously. Neon signs flickered over diners and storefronts. Old-fashioned lampposts lit cobblestone sidewalks. The architecture looked dated, like something out of the 1950s. A gas station sat on the corner. Perfect. The attendant was already outside, as if waiting. A man in his late 50s, wearing coveralls smeared with oil. He filled the tank silently while Josh tried to make small talk. But the man only stared, his expression blank, eyes reflecting the glow of the station lights. When Josh handed over cash, the man paused, turning the bills over as though they were foreign. Finally, without a word, he stuffed them into his pocket and shuffled inside. Uneasy, the two friends drove further into town. They passed a diner where people sat inside, but none of them moved. Forks hovered over plates, cups remained untouched. Everyone sat frozen, eyes following the car as it rolled past. Eric muttered that they should leave. Josh nodded. But just as they reached the edge of town, the engine sputtered and died, the same way it had on the bridge in the last story. They tried restarting it. Nothing. The headlights dimmed. Darkness pressed in, broken only by the faint glow of the town behind them. And then they noticed something strange. The people from the diner were no longer inside. Figures now lined the sidewalks, their bodies perfectly still, faces pale, all turned toward the car, watching. Heart pounding, Josh twisted the ignition until finally, mercifully, the engine coughed back to life. Tires screeched against asphalt as they tore out of town, never daring to look back. For miles, the road twisted through dense woods. When they finally reached the interstate, both were silent, too shaken to speak. But when Josh glanced at the fuel gauge, his blood ran cold. The tank was still full. Later research revealed nothing. No maps showed a town in that valley. Locals swore no such place had ever existed, but Josh and Eric insist it was there. They even remembered the name painted on a crumbling sign at the entrance, Cold Spring Hollow. What chills them most isn't the town itself, but the thought that something wanted them to enter, and something else wanted them to stay. If a whole town disappearing into thin air sounds impossible, wait until you hear our next story. Because not every horror on the road comes from ghosts or phantoms. Sometimes it's flesh and blood. And sometimes it's the last face you ever expect to see. The stories of haunted bridges and phantom towns are terrifying, but at least those horrors vanish with daylight. The most chilling road trip story I've ever come across didn't involve ghosts at all. It involved a man. A man who used highways the way hunters use forests. In the summer of 2003, a young couple, Mark and Allison, were driving cross-country from Ohio to Arizona. They alternated shifts, sometimes driving through the night to save time. It was just past midnight when they entered a desolate stretch of highway in Missouri. The road was dark, lined with dense trees. Occasionally, the glow of their headlights would catch the reflective green of road signs, but otherwise it was endless black. That's when they saw him. A figure stood on the overpass ahead, silhouetted against the moonlight. At first, it seemed like a hitchhiker waiting for someone, but as they drew closer, they realized he wasn't waiting. He was watching. The man leaned over the railing, head tilted unnaturally, like a predator studying prey. As their car passed under the bridge, Mark swore the figure smiled. Unnerved, they sped up, but 20 minutes later another overpass appeared, and there he was again. Same posture, same tilt of the head. Allison gasped. "That's impossible," she whispered. Mark's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. He accelerated, desperate to outrun whatever game this was. But with every overpass, the same figure appeared, motionless, always staring. Finally, they pulled into a gas station, shaken. The clerk gave them a wary look as they asked if anyone else had seen a man on the bridges that night. The clerk's face darkened. "You saw him?" he asked quietly. "That's not the first time. Folks say there's someone out there who stalks travelers, been going on for years. No one ever gets a clear look at him, just shadows. He shows up and sometimes cars disappear between towns." The couple didn't want to hear more. They filled up and got back on the road, but Allison couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Hours later, exhaustion forced them to stop at a rest area. The lot was empty except for one semi parked far down. They reclined their seats, trying to sleep. But around 3 a.m., Allison opened her eyes and froze. A shadow moved across the pavement outside, slowly, deliberately. She held her breath as it passed by the driver's side, the faint outline of a man visible in the glow of a distant lamppost. He didn't approach the car. He just circled it once, dragging something metallic along the ground. A scraping sound echoed in the silence. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he vanished into the trees. At dawn, they checked the car. Long, deliberate scratches ran across both doors, etched so deep the paint peeled away. They left Missouri behind, swearing never to stop on a dark highway again. But to this day, they wonder, was it one man or something worse, something that moves faster than anyone should? Some say the man on the overpass is real, a predator who knows those roads better than anyone. Others believe he's something less human, a manifestation of every traveler's fear of isolation and pursuit. But whatever he is, people still report glimpses of him watching from above. And if the idea of a hunter stalking you from the shadows isn't enough, our next story plunges us into something even more terrifying. Because sometimes, it's not strangers who haunt you on the road. Sometimes, it's the people you thought you could trust. In the fall of 2009, a man named Stephen was driving home from a business trip in Kentucky. He had left later than planned, and the drive stretched into the early hours of the morning. The road was nearly empty, the kind of silence where even the hum of the tires on asphalt feels too loud. Stephen's eyelids grew heavy, so he rolled down the window to let in the cold night air. The chill woke him up, but what really snapped him alert was the sound of something shifting in the back seat. At first, he told himself it was luggage sliding around. He had tossed his briefcase and coat onto the back seat before leaving. But when he glanced into the rearview mirror, he froze. There was someone sitting there. A pale figure, motionless, with hair hanging forward to cover the face. His heart nearly stopped. He slammed on the brakes and whipped around, ready to confront whoever or whatever was in his car. But the back seat was empty. Only his coat lay crumpled across the leather. Shaking, Stephen laughed nervously at himself. Sleep deprivation, he thought, just a trick of the mirror. He tried to brush it off, but a pit of dread settled in his chest. He kept driving, but now he avoided the rearview mirror. The urge to check it, though, became unbearable, like a compulsion. When he finally looked again, his stomach turned cold. The figure was back. This time it wasn't just sitting there. It was leaning forward closer, as though peering over his shoulder. Its face was still obscured, but he could see the faint curve of a grin. Stephen swerved onto the shoulder and flung the door open, stumbling out into the night. The road was empty, nothing but the distant chirp of crickets. He shone his phone's flashlight into the car. Again, nothing. Trying to convince himself he was imagining it, he climbed back in and drove on, every muscle tense. An hour later, fog rolled across the road, swallowing the world in a dense white haze. Stephen slowed, peering through the mist. The radio, which had been nothing but static earlier, suddenly crackled to life. A voice whispered his name. "Stephen." His grip on the wheel tightened. He turned the volume knob, but the whisper only grew louder. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement. The figure was no longer in the back seat. It was in the passenger seat beside him. This time, its face was visible. Pale skin stretched thin over sharp bones, eyes black and unblinking, mouth curling into a grotesque smile that revealed too many teeth. Stephen screamed and slammed on the brakes. His car spun, tires screeching on wet asphalt before coming to rest sideways on the empty highway. When he looked to the passenger seat, it was empty. Heart pounding, he sat there for minutes, trying to calm down. Finally, he forced himself to keep driving, desperate to reach the next town. When dawn broke, he pulled into a diner just off the highway. The waitress noticed how pale he looked and asked if he was all right. He nearly told her everything but stopped himself. Who would believe him? But as she poured his coffee, her eyes drifted past him to the window, and her face went pale. "You've got someone in your car," she whispered. Stephen turned so fast he nearly fell out of his seat. His car sat in the lot, sunlight glinting off its roof. And there, through the back window, he saw it again. The figure, sitting calmly in the rear seat, staring at the diner with that same impossible grin. He left his breakfast untouched when he got back outside. The car was empty again. He drove the rest of the way home in daylight, terrified to even glance in the mirror. For weeks afterward, he refused to drive at night. But no matter what he did, the sense of being watched never left. Friends said he looked over his shoulder too often, like he was expecting something. One morning, Stephen's neighbors found his car sitting in the driveway with the door wide open. The driver's seat was empty, but the back seat was soaked in water, and muddy footprints led from the car straight to his front door. Stephen was never seen again. Some say he was just another tired traveler who vanished on the road. Others whisper about the passenger, a presence that chooses lonely drivers, climbing into their cars like it belongs there. Once you've seen it, they say, you never drive alone again. And if the idea of a silent passenger haunting your every drive makes your skin crawl, then what comes next is even worse. Because the final story doesn't just involve seeing things, it's about hearing voices that should never have been there in the first place. Truckers often said the highway had its own rhythm. The endless stretches of asphalt, the low drone of tires against the road, the blinking constellation of red taillights on the horizon, it all merged into a hypnotic trance. Time loosened on the road. Hours slipped through the cracks unnoticed, and nights stretched into eternity. For many drivers, silence was their only companion. But for Earl, silence was the one thing he could not stand. Earl had been hauling freight for more than 30 years. He had seen summer storms split the plains with lightning, deer leaping blindly into his headlights, and the empty glow of 100 desolate gas stations that blurred together across states. Yet none of those ever unsettled him the way silence did. Silence was too heavy. Silence carried weight. Silence gave room for memories to claw their way back into his mind. And that was why he always kept his CB radio on. Most nights, it was nothing more than a faint hiss, static crawling like restless insects inside the cab. Occasionally, another driver's voice broke through, a quick check-in or a joke to kill the loneliness. More often, though, the airwaves were empty. Truckers had changed. The old chatter was fading, replaced by cell phones and dispatch screens. Still, Earl kept the device alive, even if it meant listening to the endless whisper of static, because that whisper was better than silence. It was early spring when the road carried him through the Nevada desert. Midnight had painted the horizon black, leaving only a pale stretch of asphalt cutting forward under his headlights. The desert around him looked dead, scrub brush clawing at the earth, stones scattered like bones, and no moon above to soften the darkness. The world felt stripped bare, reduced to the hum of his engine and the thrum of his tired heart. Earl adjusted in his seat, the leather groaning beneath him, and swallowed a mouthful of lukewarm coffee. His eyelids fought the weight of fatigue, but the steady drone of the radio soothed his nerves until the static shifted. A faint distortion slithered through the hiss, a tremor that felt too deliberate. Then a voice seeped into the cab, fragile and strange, as if pulled through a wall of water. It was his name. The sound pierced through his chest like a needle. The mug of coffee tumbled from his hand and bled across his jeans. His pulse surged against his throat. No one on the frequency should know who he was, not out here in the dead desert. The name repeated once, drawn out slowly, almost childlike. The CB sputtered into silence again. The hiss returned, cold and steady, as though nothing had happened. Earl tried to convince himself it was coincidence. Maybe someone else had said something similar, distorted by interference. The desert warped sound in strange ways. He turned the radio down and pressed his focus back onto the dark road. His hands clung tighter to the wheel than before. Half an hour crawled by. The desert remained barren, his headlights swallowing mile after mile with no relief. Then the voice returned. It did not sound like interference anymore. It was clearer, sharper, and it carried something impossible inside it, knowledge. The words that spilled through the speaker were not random. They cut directly into the sealed past Earl had tried to bury. The fire. The accident from his early days on the road, the one that had almost claimed his life. He had not spoken about it in years. Few people even remembered it had happened. But the voice recited the details as though it had stood beside him in the smoke. The screech of the tires, the flames swallowing the trailer, the desperate scramble to escape before the inferno devoured him. Each phrase twisted deeper, carving open the old scars. Earl's skin prickled with sweat as the CB carried on, shifting tones now, mimicking words that belonged to someone else, his wife. Words she had whispered when they were young, words she had uttered in her final hours when illness hollowed her body. The familiarity shattered him. He gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, but he could not stop the flood of memory. The CB did not fall silent again. Every channel he switched to carried the same voice, weaving between frequencies as if the desert itself had become a transmitter. Sometimes the sound was brittle laughter, jagged and sharp. Other times it was a sob, fragile and desperate, like a child abandoned in the dark. The night pressed harder against the cab. By 2 in the morning, the highway felt endless, a black ribbon unraveling beneath his headlights with no sign of life ahead or behind. The static whispered constantly now, dozens of overlapping tones that were neither human nor mechanical. They called his name again and again, a chorus of dissonance that crawled beneath his skin. Then, through the murmur, came a command. "Look behind you." His throat closed, his vision swam. Slowly, against every instinct, his eyes flicked toward the passenger side mirror. At first he saw only the road stretching out into infinite darkness. But then, in the faint reflection of the glass, a figure appeared in the passenger seat. It was too tall, its head brushing the roof of the cab, its posture grotesquely hunched. Its face was nothing but darkness except for a grin, unnaturally wide, carved too deep into its shape. The figure did not move. It simply sat there, silent, watching him. Earl's foot slammed the brake pedal. The truck lurched violently, tires screeching on the asphalt until it rattled to a halt on the deserted highway. His chest heaved as he twisted toward the seat. It was empty. The CB crackled again. The same voice spilled out, but this time the words were not strange. They were his own. Perfectly replicated, his voice mocked him from the speaker, repeating phrases he had never spoken aloud. His hands trembled as he reached for the device. But he pulled back, as though touching it might give the thing permission to crawl further into his world. By 3 a.m., fatigue clawed at his eyes, yet fear anchored him in place. He shut the CB off entirely. Relief lasted only seconds before he realized the whispering had not stopped. The voices now leaked from the cab itself, faint and hollow, seeping from the air vents and the seams in the walls. The dashboard lights flickered. The gauges plummeted, then spiked wildly. His headlights dimmed, plunging the desert into total blackness before flaring bright again. The entire rig groaned as though something unseen had wrapped claws around it. And then came the laughter. It was not transmitted through radio waves. It was inside the cab, high-pitched, sharp, unmistakably a child. Earl's stomach knotted. Slowly his eyes lifted to the rearview mirror. Two small hands, pale and thin, pressed against the glass of the sleeper window behind him. The fingers were too long, unnaturally stretched, splayed flat as though trying to claw through. He nearly veered off the highway. The hands vanished as quickly as they appeared. The laughter dissolved. Yet the mirror betrayed him again when he dared to glance back. His own reflection stared at him, but it was twisted, mouth wrenched open in a silent scream. His eyes in the reflection burned with terror he had not yet released. The hours until dawn were endless. Each mile stretched further than the last, his body shaking with exhaustion and dread. Tears blurred his vision, though he could not remember when they had begun to fall. His fists bled from gripping the wheel too hard, the skin rubbed raw by his own desperation to remain grounded. At last, the horizon softened with the faintest light of morning. Relief was a fragile thread, but it was enough to guide him into the safety of a truck stop. The lot was crowded with rigs, their bulk gleaming beneath the rising sun. The sight of people, flesh and blood and breathing, nearly broke him. He staggered inside the diner, unsteady on his legs. Words stuck in his throat, but his body carried the weight of the night like a sickness. The room buzzed with chatter, utensils clinking against plates, but Earl felt no comfort. Something pressed against his mind, an aftertaste of the road that refused to leave. When he looked back out the window, he froze. The rig parked outside was not his. Its paint was scorched, the trailer blackened by flame, the same wreck he had abandoned decades ago in that mountain pass fire. He blinked and the vision dissolved. His own truck stood in its place, gleaming in the clear light of day. Earl never touched the CB radio again. He left it shattered on the diner floor. Soon after, he left trucking altogether. But the story did not die with him. Other drivers whispered about channels that spoke in voices too perfect, voices that knew things they could not possibly know, radios that turned themselves on when silence pressed too heavily against the cab. Some claimed it was interference, stray signals warped by distance. Others whispered that the desert itself carried echoes of the dead, reaching for the living through the fragile wires of technology. Earl never offered his full version. Those who knew him said he rarely slept through the night after that journey. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the world seemed calm, he would wake suddenly, heart racing, convinced he had heard it again. The faint crackle of static, followed by a child's whisper curling around his name. And maybe that was the truth of the highway. It was not distance that wore men down, nor the nights without rest. It was the knowledge that out there, beyond the headlights, something listened, something waited, and once you answered its call, you would never again drive alone. The road promises freedom, but these 10 stories reveal its darker truth. Highways hold more than asphalt and mile markers. They cradle secrets, hauntings, and shadows that never leave. Next time you travel at night, remember, not every passenger is seen, and not every voice is human. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real horror, and hit the bell so you never travel these dark roads alone again.